The moment I watched her nose wrinkle in disgust as she walked into my home, I knew exactly what she thought of me. After 3 years of snide comments and condescending glances, this was the final straw. My daughter-in-law had always made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious world, but insulting the perfume my late mother had given me, that crossed a line. So when she and my son decided to move into my rental property without paying a dime, I knew exactly how to serve their eviction notice. Some people call it petty. I call it poetic justice. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I never expected to be living alone at 62. After losing Robert to cancer 5 years ago, the house felt emptier than I could bear. Our son Tyler had already moved to Chicago by then, building his own life and career as a financial advisor. I was proud of him, even if the distance hurt more than I let on. The first time Tyler mentioned Amber, I could hear the excitement in his voice. They'd met at some charity gala, and according to him, she was brilliant, ambitious, and everything he'd ever wanted. I was thrilled. All I've ever wanted was for my son to be happy. When they finally visited me in Savannah 3 months later, I spent days preparing. I baked Tyler's favorite pecan pie, aired out the guest bedroom, and even splurged on new sheets. I wanted everything to be perfect for meeting the woman who had captured my son's heart. Amber Martinez Collins was undeniably beautiful. Tall, with sleek dark hair, and the kind of polished appearance that made me suddenly aware of every wrinkle on my face. She greeted me with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. As we hugged, I noticed her subtly pull back, and that was my first clue. "What a quaint home," she said, glancing around my living room with barely concealed judgment. The home Robert and I had lovingly filled with treasures from 35 years of marriage suddenly seemed shabby through her eyes. Tyler didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. Either way, dinner was an exercise in restraint as Amber peppered the conversation with thinly veiled comments about how charmingly outdated everything in Savannah seemed. I bit my tongue and served pie. When they announced their engagement 6 months later, I swallowed my reservations and sent them my blessing along with my mother's pearl earrings, a family heirloom I'd always intended for my future daughter-in-law. Amber sent a typed thank you note that could have been addressed to anyone. I flew to Chicago for their wedding, where I met Amber's parents, Catherine and David Collins, who owned some kind of tech consulting firm and made sure everyone knew it. They hosted the wedding at the city's most exclusive venue, and I felt like an outsider among their friends. I was seated at a table far from the wedding party, with distant relatives who barely knew Tyler. "We didn't want to overwhelm you with too many responsibilities," Amber explained when I asked if there was anything I could help with. "At your age, it's better to just enjoy the day." I was 57. After the wedding, my calls with Tyler became less frequent. When we did talk, he was always rushing somewhere, or Amber would need him suddenly, cutting our conversations short. Twice I suggested visiting, but there was always some reason why the timing wasn't right. 3 years passed this way, with me gradually accepting that this was what our relationship had become. Then, out of the blue, Tyler called with news. He'd been laid off during company restructuring. The severance package was decent, he assured me, but Chicago's cost of living was brutal, and they were considering their options. "Actually, Mom," he said hesitantly, "we were thinking about moving back to Savannah for a while." My heart leapt at the possibility of having my son nearby again. "You know I have plenty of room here," I offered immediately. "Oh, we couldn't impose like that," he said quickly. "But we remembered you have that rental property on Whitaker Street. Is it occupied right now?" The small historic townhouse had been Robert's pet project. He'd restored it himself, and after he passed, I couldn't bear to sell it. Instead, I'd been renting it to carefully selected tenants, the income supplementing my teacher's pension nicely. My current tenant's lease ends next month, I said. But Tyler, that place rents for $2,200 a month. I can give you a family discount. Of course. Actually, Mom, he interrupted, we were hoping you might let us stay there rent-free just until I find something new. 6 months, tops. Amber has some freelance work, but it's not enough for rent yet. I hesitated only briefly. Of course, sweetheart, family comes first. 3 weeks later, they arrived with a moving truck full of expensive furniture that made me wonder just how tight money really was. But I kept that thought to myself as I handed over the keys to the townhouse, along with a welcome basket of local treats and essentials. We should have dinner soon, I suggested. I could cook something at my place this weekend? Tyler smiled. That sounds great, Mom. Let us get settled first, and we'll set something up. 2 weeks passed before they finally agreed to dinner. I spent the day cooking Tyler's favorites: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and collard greens, and dabbed on a few drops of my signature scent, Chanel No. 5. It had been my mother's perfume, and she'd given me my first bottle on my 16th birthday. After she passed, wearing it became my small way of keeping her close. When they arrived, Tyler hugged me warmly while Amber hung back. As she stepped into my entryway, her nose wrinkled visibly. God, what is that smell? She muttered, not quite under her breath. Mom's perfume, Tyler answered, shooting her a warning. Look, it's her signature scent. Amber's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. Oh, it's just so overwhelming. Very old lady, isn't it? The room went silent. Tyler looked mortified but didn't defend me. It was my mother's favorite, I said quietly. She wore it every day until she died. Well, maybe it should have. Died with her, Amber replied with a tight smile. No offense, but it gives me a headache. Tyler quickly changed the subject, steering us toward the dining room while launching into a story about their new neighbors. The evening proceeded with strained politeness, but something had shifted permanently. The comment about my mother's perfume wasn't just about the scent. It was about erasing the last link to my past that I cherished daily. Over the next few months, they settled into a rhythm that notably excluded me. Tyler would call occasionally, always with excuses about why they couldn't meet up. Meanwhile, through neighborhood friends, I heard they were hosting dinner parties at the townhouse. 4 months in, Tyler called with news. He'd found a job opportunity in Seattle. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, ignoring the pang in my heart. When would you start? That's the thing, he hesitated. It's perfect timing because our 6 months here are almost up, but Amber really loves the townhouse. We were hoping we could stay a bit longer until we decide if Seattle is right for us. My pause must have been telling. Mom, I know we said 6 months, but Amber's really settled in. She's redone the living room and everything. She what? I hadn't given permission for any renovations. It looks amazing, he rushed on. Very modern. She's got great taste. I took a deep breath. Tyler, I had tenants lined up for next month. That property is part of my retirement income. Can't you just push them back? Family should come first, right? That's what you always say. The manipulation was so obvious it almost took my breath away. The next day, I drove to the townhouse unannounced. When Amber opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to annoyance in seconds. Beth, we weren't expecting you. I stepped past her into what used to be my husband's pride and joy. The warm, historic charm had been stripped away. The original hardwood floors were now covered with stark white rugs. The built-in bookshelves Robert had crafted by hand were painted glossy black and filled with what appeared to be decorative objects rather than books. What have you done to this place? I whispered. Amber crossed her arms. We improved it. This neighborhood has potential, but everything is so dated. If you ever want to sell, you should thank us. I'm not selling, I said firmly. And I'm not extending your stay either. Her eyes narrowed. Tyler said you agreed to another 6 months. Tyler was mistaken. I have new tenants arriving in 3 weeks. What followed was the kind of argument I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Amber called me selfish, ungrateful, old-fashioned. She claimed they'd put thousands into improving my property. She even suggested that if I really loved Tyler, I would sign the townhouse over to them entirely. After all, she said with chilling calm, it's not like you need 2 properties at your age. You should be downsizing. I left feeling shaken but resolute. That evening, I called my lawyer, Margaret, who had been my friend since college. After hearing the whole story, she didn't mince words. Beth, you need to serve them with formal eviction papers immediately. From what you're telling me, they have no intention of leaving voluntarily. But he's my son, I protested weakly. And she's manipulating him, and you. This isn't going to get better without boundaries. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The next morning, Margaret helped me prepare the official eviction notice, giving them the legally required 30 days. As I signed the document, my gaze fell on the small crystal bottle of Chanel No. 5 on my vanity. An idea formed. Petty, perhaps, but deeply satisfying. Margaret, I said slowly, would it be legally problematic if this document happened to be scented? She looked confused for a moment, then burst out laughing as understanding dawned. Absolutely not. In fact, I highly recommend it. The next day, I carefully spritzed the eviction notice with my Chanel No. 5, letting the fragrance permeate every fiber of the paper. The scent wasn't overwhelming, just noticeable enough that there would be no mistaking its identity. Margaret watched with amused approval as I slipped the perfumed document into an envelope. Want me to deliver it? She offered. I can make it official. I shook my head. No, this is something I need to do myself. The drive to the townhouse was short, but it gave me time to steel my resolve. I'd spent my entire life avoiding confrontation, always putting others' needs before my own. Robert used to tease me about it gently. Beth, honey, you'd give someone the shirt off your back even if you were freezing. He wasn't wrong. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about honoring Robert's memory and the home he'd poured his heart into. When I arrived, I was surprised to see unfamiliar cars lining the street. Music and laughter drifted from the open windows of the townhouse. They were hosting yet another gathering, apparently. I hesitated only briefly before walking up to the door and ringing the bell. No answer. I rang again, longer this time. Finally, the door swung open to reveal Tyler, a drink in hand and surprise written across his face. Mom? What are you doing here? Behind him, I could see at least a dozen people milling around what used to be my living room. A makeshift bar had been set up on Robert's antique sideboard. I need to speak with you and Amber, I said firmly. It's important. He glanced nervously over his shoulder. We're kind of in the middle of something. Amber's boss is here, and some potential clients. This will only take a minute. I stepped past him into the house. The interior looked even more transformed than during my last visit. The warm terracotta walls were now stark white, and most of the original features appeared to have been covered up or removed. My heart sank at the sight of it, but I kept my expression neutral as I scanned the room for Amber. She was holding court near the kitchen, dressed impeccably and gesturing, with a wineglass as she spoke to a small group. When she spotted me, her animated expression faltered for just a second before she excused herself and made her way over. Beth, she said with forced brightness. What a surprise. We're hosting a networking event for my freelance business. I can see that, I replied. I apologize for interrupting, but I have something for both of you that can't wait. Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside her. Can't it wait until tomorrow? We could come by for coffee in the morning. No, I said simply, and removed the envelope from my purse. As soon as I held it out, a subtle waft of Chanel No. 5 escaped. Amber's nose wrinkled immediately in recognition, and her eyes narrowed. "What is this?" Tyler asked, taking the envelope, when Amber made no move to accept it. "It's an official notice to vacate the property within 30 days, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Your 6 months are up, and as I explained to Amber yesterday, I have new tenants arriving." "Next month?" The color drained from Tyler's face. "Mom, you can't be serious. We talked about this." "No, you assumed," I corrected gently. "I never agreed to extend your stay, Tyler." Amber snatched the envelope from his hands and tore it open. As she unfolded the document, the perfume's scent intensified. Her face contorted in a mixture of rage and disgust. "Are you kidding me?" she hissed, waving the paper. "You deliberately doused this in that awful perfume?" Several guests nearby turned to look, their conversations faltering. "I thought you should have something to remember me by," I replied calmly. "Since you find it so memorable." Tyler looked mortified. "Mom, this isn't 30 days, I cut in. "And I expect the property to be returned to its original condition, or the cost of repairs will come out of your security deposit." "Security deposit?" Amber laughed incredulously. "We never paid a security deposit." "Then I'll bill you for the damages," I said. "I have extensive documentation of the property's condition before you moved in." Amber's confident facade cracked completely. "You ungrateful—" "I think it's time for me to go," I interrupted, unwilling to create more of a scene in front of her guests. "The notice explains everything you need to know." As I turned to leave, Tyler followed me to the door, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "Mom, wait. You can't do this to us. Where are we supposed to go?" The genuine distress in his voice nearly broke my resolve. But I reminded myself that my son was a 34-year-old man who had allowed his wife to insult me in my own home, remake his father's cherished project without permission, and attempt to manipulate me out of my property. "You're both resourceful adults with good educations and plenty of options," I said gently. "I'm sure you'll figure something out." His face hardened. "Is this because of what Amber said about your perfume? Are you really this petty?" The accusation stung more than I wanted to admit. "No, Tyler. This is because you and Amber made an agreement, and then tried to change the terms without my consent. This is because you've allowed her to disrespect me and your father's memory repeatedly. The perfume was just the final indication that you two don't see me as a person worthy of basic respect." "That's not fair," he protested, but I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Take some time to think about it," I suggested. "And please let your guests know I apologize for the interruption." I walked back to my car with my head held high, despite the tears threatening to spill. As I drove home, a strange mixture of guilt and liberation washed over me. For perhaps the first time since Robert died, I had stood up for myself without compromise. The next morning, a barrage of text messages awaited me, some from Tyler, apologizing but still arguing their case, and several from Amber that grew increasingly hostile. I read them all but responded to none. Margaret had advised me to keep communication formal and in writing from this point forward, so I sent a brief email reiterating the terms of the eviction notice. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from an attorney representing Tyler and Amber, claiming they had made significant improvements to the property that increased its value, and demanding compensation before they would vacate. I forwarded it to Margaret, who responded with a terse legal letter pointing out that unauthorized renovations without the property owner's consent did not constitute improvements and were, in fact, a violation of the verbal agreement they had made. "They're bluffing," Margaret assured me over the phone. "They don't have a leg to stand on legally, and they know it. This is just an intimidation tactic." A week passed with no further communication. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Tyler standing alone on my porch, soaking wet and looking exhausted. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside to let him enter, noticing he took care to remove his wet shoes at the door, a small gesture of respect he hadn't shown in years. We sat in awkward silence in the living room for a few moments before he spoke. "I've come to apologize," he said finally, "and to tell you that we'll be out of the townhouse by the end of next week." Relief flooded through me, but I kept my expression neutral. "Thank you for letting me know. Amber's decided to take the job in Seattle after all," he continued, staring at his hands. "And I'll be going with her." I nodded, unsurprised but still sad. "I thought you might. Mom—" He hesitated, clearly struggling for words. "I wanted to say I'm sorry, not just about the townhouse, but for everything. For letting Amber treat you the way she has, for not standing up for you, for taking advantage of your generosity." The apology was unexpected, and it took me a moment to find my voice. "What changed your mind?" He gave a rueful smile. "Would you believe it was the perfume?" I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "After you left that night, Amber was furious. She kept complaining about how the scent was giving her a headache, how you'd deliberately tried to sabotage her networking event. But all I could think about was how that perfume always reminded me of you picking me up from school or making soup when I was sick." His voice grew softer, and then I realized that I couldn't remember the last time I'd really seen you, the real you, not just what Amber wanted me to see. I started noticing other things too. How she talks about you, how she's gradually isolated me from everyone I used to be close to. "That happens sometimes in relationships," I said carefully. "We don't always notice the patterns until something forces us to step back." Tyler nodded. "I'm not leaving her," he clarified quickly. "I love her, despite everything, but I've told her things need to change between us, and definitely between her and you." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "I appreciate that. And I want you to know that I've never wanted anything but happiness for you, even if I haven't always agreed with your choices." "I know," he said, and for the first time in years, I felt like he actually did. We talked for another hour, about his job prospects in Seattle, about my plans to restore the townhouse, about memories of Robert that we'd both been avoiding sharing. When he finally stood to leave, the rain had stopped, and a tentative sunlight filtered through the windows. At the door, he turned back suddenly. "Hey, Mom? For what it's worth, I think your perfume smells like home." The simple words healed something in me that I hadn't even realized was broken. After Tyler left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about the power of small acts of defiance. My scented eviction notice hadn't just been petty revenge. It had been a declaration that I still existed, that my feelings mattered, that the memory of my mother and my husband deserved respect. I walked to my vanity and picked up the crystal, bottle of Chanel No. 5. The afternoon light caught its facets, sending prisms dancing across the wall. I dabbed a drop behind each ear, inhaling the familiar scent that connected me to my past while, unexpectedly, helping to rebuild my future. True to his word, Tyler and Amber vacated the townhouse the following week. I'd braced myself for another confrontation when they handed over the keys, but to my surprise, Tyler came alone. "Amber's finalizing some details with the moving company," he explained, though we both knew that was likely an excuse. We walked through the townhouse together, surveying the changes. The damage was extensive but not irreparable. The original hardwood floors were intact beneath the white rugs, and though the built-in shelves had been painted, the craftsmanship still showed through. "I can help pay for restoring it," Tyler offered as we stood in what used to be Robert's study. "It's the least I can do." I shook my head. "That's not necessary. I've set aside some money for renovations over the years. Besides, this will give me a project to focus on." He looked relieved, but still guilty. "Amber wanted me to ask if you'd reconsider buying the new furniture from us. She says it's designer and barely used. The request was so typically Amber that I had to suppress a smile. I'm afraid it wouldn't fit with my restoration plans, but I'm sure you'll find buyers easily enough. After he left with a somewhat awkward hug, I stood alone in the empty townhouse, remembering how it had looked when Robert first showed it to me 20 years ago. It's a diamond in the rough, he'd said excitedly, gesturing at the water-stained ceilings and peeling wallpaper. Just needs some love and elbow grease. We'd spent weekends and vacations renovating it together, turning it into a jewel of the historic district. Now I had the chance to do it again, this time on my own terms. The following Monday, I met with Jason Walker, a local contractor who'd worked with Robert on several projects. He walked through the townhouse with me, making notes and occasionally shaking his head at particularly egregious changes. "They really did a number on this place," he remarked, examining where Amber had removed the original crown molding. "But nothing we can't fix. Most of these are just surface changes." We discussed a restoration plan that would honor the home's history while incorporating some tasteful updates. By the time he left, I had a comprehensive estimate and a timeline. Of about 3 months, Margaret called that evening, curious about how things had gone with the handover. "Surprisingly smooth," I told her. "Tyler came alone, and he was contrite." "Well, that's something," she said. "And you're really okay with them just walking away after everything they did to the place?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes, I think I am." The perfume-scented eviction notice was my moment of righteous anger. Now I'm ready to move forward. Speaking of moving forward, Margaret said, her tone shifting to something more tentative. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." The something turned out to be Margaret's brother-in-law, James Patterson, a retired architect who had recently moved back to Savannah after his wife's passing. He was looking for volunteer opportunities at the Historical Society, where I'd been serving as treasurer for the past 4 years. "He's brilliant with old buildings," Margaret enthused. "And he's been asking about you ever since he saw you at my birthday dinner last month." I laughed, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "Margaret Jenkins, are you trying to set me up?" "I'm simply facilitating a professional introduction between 2 history-loving individuals," she replied innocently. "If something more develops, who am I to interfere with fate?" The next day, I threw myself into planning the townhouse restoration. Jason had suggested keeping a detailed record of the process, both for Historical Society archives and for my own satisfaction. I started a journal, including before photos and my vision for each room. As I worked, I found myself wondering what Robert would think of my plans. We'd always shared similar tastes, but there were a few areas where we'd differed. He'd loved bold colors, while I preferred softer, more muted tones. Now I had the freedom to follow my own aesthetic instincts. The Historical Society meeting that Thursday felt different, knowing Margaret's brother-in-law would be there. I found myself spending extra time on my appearance, dabbing on my Chanel No. 5 and choosing a blue dress that brought out my eyes. James Patterson was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. When Margaret introduced us, his handshake was warm and lingering. "I've heard wonderful things about your work preserving Savannah's architectural heritage," he said, and I could tell from his expression that he meant it. We ended up talking long. After the meeting adjourned, first about the Historical Society's upcoming projects, then about my townhouse restoration, and finally about our shared love of travel and jazz. When he asked if I'd like to continue our conversation over dinner sometime, I surprised myself by accepting without hesitation. The next few weeks developed a pleasant rhythm. Mornings were spent at the townhouse, overseeing the restoration work, and making decisions about materials and finishes. Afternoons often found me at the Historical Society, where James and I were collaborating on a walking tour of Savannah's hidden architectural gems. And twice a week we met for dinner, slowly learning each other's stories. James had loved his wife deeply, and he spoke of her with a reverence I recognized from my own feelings about Robert. There was something healing about sharing memories with someone who truly understood grief without being consumed by it. "It never really goes away," he said one evening as we walked along the riverfront after dinner. "But eventually it makes room for other feelings to exist alongside it." 3 weeks into the townhouse renovation, I received a package from Seattle with Tyler's return address. Inside was a small, ornate silver picture frame containing a photo I'd never seen before, Tyler as a toddler, sitting on Robert's lap as I read them a story. All three of us were laughing at something now lost too. The note accompanying it was brief but heartfelt. "Found this while unpacking. Thought you might want it for the townhouse when it's finished. Things are better here. I'm working on myself and on us. Love, Tyler." I placed the photo on my mantle next to my favorite picture of Robert, feeling a quiet optimism I hadn't expected. The distance between Tyler and me remained, but it now felt like a space for growth rather than an unbridgeable chasm. As May turned to June, the townhouse began to transform. The original hardwood floors emerged from beneath layers of carpet and laminate, glowing warmly after Jason's team carefully restored them. The kitchen cabinets, which Amber had painted stark white, returned to their natural cherry wood. Each restored element felt like reclaiming a piece of history, both the home's and my own. James became a regular presence at the renovation site, offering invaluable suggestions about period-appropriate details and occasionally rolling up his sleeves to help with the work. His expertise saved me from several potentially costly mistakes, and his company made the process more enjoyable than I'd anticipated. "You know," he said one afternoon as we admired the newly reinstalled crown molding, "there's something poetic about this restoration." "How so?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "You're not just returning this place to what it was," he explained, gesturing around the room. "You're honoring its history while making thoughtful improvements. It's evolving, not just reverting." His words stayed with me, resonating on a level beyond the renovation itself. I was evolving too, not just reverting to who I'd been before the conflicts with Amber, but becoming someone new who incorporated lessons from that difficult time. In early July, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a familiar voice spoke hesitantly. "Mrs. Harrison?" "It's Amber." I sat down, surprised by the sudden tension in my body. "Hello, Amber." She paused, clearly struggling. "Tyler doesn't know I'm calling, but I wanted to apologize." I remained silent, giving her space to continue. "I was terrible to you," she said finally. "About the perfume, about the house, about everything. I could make excuses about being stressed or insecure, but the truth is, I was just being selfish and mean." Her candor took me aback. This didn't sound like the Amber I knew. "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious. A long sigh came through, the line. "Therapy, honestly. And seeing Tyler stand up to me for the first time. After we moved to Seattle, he made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate how I'd been treating you. It made me look at some things about myself that I didn't like." "I appreciate you calling," I said, unsure what else to offer. "There's one more thing," she continued. "I know you're restoring the townhouse and, well, I found the original crown molding in a salvage warehouse here in Seattle, the one from the living room that I had removed. The owner said he'd be willing to ship it back to Savannah." The gesture was unexpected and oddly touching. "That would be wonderful, Amber. Thank you." After we hung up, I sat in my garden, processing the conversation. People were capable of such surprising growth sometimes. The thought gave me hope for my relationship with Tyler and for Amber's journey as well. The doorbell rang later that afternoon, interrupting my reflections. James stood on my porch holding a small gift bag. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said with a warm smile. "But I found something at an estate sale that made me think of you." Inside the bag was a vintage Chanel No. 5 advertisement from the 1950s, beautifully framed. The illustration showed an elegant woman applying the perfume, with the tagline, "Every woman alive wants Chanel No. 5. "I thought it might look nice in your dressing area," James explained. "A little tribute to your signature scent." I laughed, explaining the significance the perfume had taken on in recent months. As I told him about the scented eviction notice and its aftermath, I realized how the story had transformed from something painful into something empowering, even amusing in retrospect. "You know," James said thoughtfully when I finished, "the best revenge isn't just living well, it's becoming more authentic." Looking at the framed advertisement, I couldn't help but agree. What had begun as a small act of defiance, perfuming an eviction notice, had catalyzed a sequence of changes that led me here. Standing in my garden with a new friend who appreciated me exactly as I was, overseeing the loving restoration of a piece of my history, and rebuilding connections I'd thought were permanently damaged. The scent of gardenias drifted from the bushes Robert and I had planted years ago, mingling with the faint traces of Chanel No. 5 on my wrists. Both were part of my story now, the old and the new, loss and discovery, endings and beginnings, all woven together into something unexpectedly beautiful. The restoration of the townhouse progressed steadily through the summer months. Each week brought new revelations as we peeled back the layers of Amber's modernization to reveal the historical bones beneath. When the salvaged crown molding arrived from Seattle, Jason and his team carefully reinstalled it, completing the living room's return to its former glory. "You can hardly tell it was ever gone," James remarked as we stood admiring the finished space. "It's as if the house is healing itself." I found myself increasingly drawn to his poetic way of seeing the world. Unlike Robert, who had been practical and straightforward, James approached life with a philosopher's contemplation. Our differences created a fascinating complementarity that surprised me daily. In late August, Jason announced that the townhouse restoration was nearly complete. Only a few finishing touches remained, selecting light fixtures for the dining room, deciding on window treatments, and choosing artwork for the newly restored walls. "I've been thinking," James said one evening as we shared dinner on my back porch, "about what you plan to do with the townhouse once it's finished." I sipped my wine, considering the question. "I hadn't really thought beyond the restoration. Find new tenants, I suppose." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's certainly an option. But have you considered other possibilities, such as?" "Well," he said carefully, "the Historical Society has been looking for a small property to serve as a visitor center and museum focusing on Savannah's residential architecture. The location is perfect, and the restoration work you've done exemplifies exactly what we try to teach about preserving historical homes." The suggestion caught me off guard. "You think I should donate it?" "Not necessarily donate," he clarified quickly, "but perhaps a long-term lease arrangement that would provide you income while allowing the society to establish something meaningful. They have grant funding available for such projects." The idea took root in my mind, growing more appealing the more I considered it. Robert had loved sharing his knowledge of historical architecture with others. What better way to honor his memory than to turn the townhouse into a space where visitors could learn about Savannah's architectural heritage? "I'd want to be involved," I said finally. "Help design the exhibits, maybe give tours occasionally," James smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Your knowledge of the home's history would be invaluable." We spent the rest of the evening sketching possibilities, our excitement building with each new idea. By the time James left, I had the beginnings of a proposal to present to the Historical Society Board at their next meeting. The following week brought an unexpected email from Tyler. He and Amber were planning a visit to Savannah in October for a friend's wedding and hoped to see me while they were in town. "Amber specifically asked if we could have dinner at your place," he wrote. She said she wants to apologize in person. I know this is a lot to ask after everything, but I think she's genuinely trying to make amends. I read the message several times, noticing the absence of my usual defensive reaction. Time and distance had softened the sharper edges of those painful memories. Besides, I was curious to see if Amber's apparent change of heart was genuine. Of course, I replied. I'd love to see you both. As September rolled into October, my life settled into a pleasant routine. Mornings were dedicated to finalizing the townhouse restoration and developing the museum proposal with the Historical Society. Afternoons often found me volunteering at the local library's genealogy department, helping visitors trace their Savannah roots. And evenings increasingly belonged to James, whose gentle courtship had become an unexpected joy in my life. On a particularly beautiful fall afternoon, James suggested a picnic in Forsyth Park. He arrived at my door carrying an antique wicker basket and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "You're up to something," I observed as we strolled toward the park. "Can't a man simply enjoy a picnic with a beautiful woman without ulterior motives?" he asked innocently. "A man, perhaps. You, definitely not." He laughed, leading me to a secluded spot beneath a sprawling oak tree draped with Spanish moss. The picnic he unpacked was elaborate: gourmet cheeses, fresh fruit, homemade bread, and a bottle of champagne that he carefully placed to one side. "For later," he explained with a mysterious smile. We ate and talked, watching families play and tourists take photos of the famous fountain. The October air carried just enough crispness to hint at the coming winter, though Savannah's idea of winter was mild compared to northern standards. After we finished eating, James grew uncharacteristically quiet. "Everything all right?" I asked, concerned by the sudden shift in his demeanor. He nodded, reaching for my hand. "Better than all right. Beth, these past few months with you have been unexpected in the best possible way." My heart quickened as he continued. "When Catherine died, I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever. I wasn't looking for another relationship, didn't think I wanted one. And then Margaret introduced us, and suddenly I found myself looking forward to historical society meetings with an enthusiasm that had nothing to do with architecture." I laughed softly, remembering how I'd felt the same anticipation. "I'm not suggesting we rush into anything," he said earnestly. "We're both independent people with full lives, but I wanted you to know that I've fallen in love with you, and I hope that one day, when you're ready, you might consider making our arrangement more permanent." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it revealed not an engagement ring, but a delicate silver key on a chain. "This is the original key to my family's summer home on Tybee Island," he explained. "I've just finished restoring it, and I'd like it to be our place, somewhere we can go together, or you can use any time you need space by the ocean. No pressure, no timeline, just a promise that whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Tears welled in my eyes as I lifted the key from its velvet nest. The thoughtfulness of the gesture overwhelmed me. It was a commitment that respected my independence while offering partnership. "It's perfect," I whispered, leaning forward to kiss him. He fastened the necklace around my neck, then reached for the champagne. I thought we might toast to new beginnings. As we sipped champagne in the dappled sunlight, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unlikely sequence of events that had led me here. Had Amber never complained about my old lady perfume, had I never scented that eviction notice in a moment of justified petulance, would any of this have unfolded? Tyler and Amber's visit approached with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. James offered to be present for moral support, but I declined. This was something I needed to navigate on my own. The day before their arrival, I received a package from Seattle. Inside was a handwritten note from Amber and a small gift box containing a limited edition travel size of Chanel No. 5. "Thought you might appreciate having this for your travels," Amber wrote. I've come to associate the scent with strength and standing up for yourself, qualities I'm trying to develop. The gesture was so unexpected that I found myself laughing out loud in my kitchen. Who would have thought Amber Collins would ever give me perfume as a peace offering? They arrived promptly at 6 the following evening. Tyler looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, and Amber's usual perfect polish was tempered with a new softness around the edges. She carried a bouquet of gardenias, my favorite flowers, and handed them to me with genuine warmth. "Thank you for having us," she said, and the absence of her usual calculated charm was striking. Dinner was initially awkward, with careful small talk about Seattle and the wedding they were attending. But as the meal progressed and wine flowed, the conversation grew more natural. Tyler spoke enthusiastically about his new job at an environmental consulting firm, and Amber shared stories about volunteer work she'd started doing with a women's shelter. "The director reminds me of you, actually," she told me. "She doesn't take nonsense from anyone, but she's incredibly kind underneath it all." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that how you see me now?" Amber blushed. "It's how I should have seen you all along." After dinner, Tyler insisted on helping with the dishes, while Amber asked to see photos of the townhouse restoration. As we sat in the living room flipping through my digital album, she grew contemplative. "I want to apologize properly," she said finally. "When we lived here, I was a different person, insecure, status-obsessed, and threatened by your relationship with Tyler. I took it out on you in 1,000 petty ways, and I'm truly sorry for that." "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious about her transformation. She twisted her wedding ring, choosing her words carefully. "After we moved to Seattle, I started seeing a therapist to work on my marriage. Tyler made it clear he wouldn't tolerate how I'd treated you, and it forced me to examine some ugly truths about myself. I realized I'd become someone I didn't like very much." Her candor was disarming. "That kind of self-reflection takes courage," I acknowledged. "The perfume-scented eviction notice helped too," she admitted with a rueful smile. "It was such a perfectly dignified way to put me in my place." I was furious at the time, but looking back, I have to admire the elegance of it. We both laughed, the tension between us dissolving into something approaching mutual respect. When Tyler rejoined us, I showed them photos of the townhouse's new incarnation as the Savannah Residential Architecture Museum. The Historical Society Board had enthusiastically approved my proposal, and the grand opening was scheduled for the following month. "Dad would have loved this," Tyler said softly, studying an image of the study that now featured an exhibit on Robert's restoration techniques. "Yes," I agreed. "He would have." As the evening wound down, Tyler surprised me by asking if they could see the townhouse in person before leaving town. "The museum isn't officially open yet," I warned, "but I could give you a private tour tomorrow if you'd like." "We'd love that," Amber said, and the genuine enthusiasm in her voice was yet another sign of how much had changed. The next day, I met them outside the townhouse, now adorned with a discreet bronze plaque, identifying it as the Savannah Residential Architecture Museum. As I unlocked the door, the familiar scent of lemon oil and beeswax welcomed us, the same cleaning products Robert had always insisted on using for the hardwood. Tyler walked through the rooms slowly, occasionally touching a restored molding, or examining a period light fixture. "It's both the same and different," he observed. "Like stepping into a memory that's been carefully preserved, but also enhanced." "That was exactly what I was aiming for," I said, pleased that he understood. Amber lingered in the kitchen, admiring the restored cherry cabinets. "These are beautiful," she said, much warmer than the white I chose. I was so obsessed with everything, looking like a magazine spread that I never considered what actually felt like home. We ended the tour in Robert's study, now transformed into an exhibition space focusing on historical restoration techniques. A large photograph of Robert working on the townhouse's front porch took pride of place on one wall. Is that where you got the idea for the perfume on the eviction notice? Tyler asked suddenly, pointing to a display about traditional cleaning methods that mentioned scenting papers with essential oils to preserve them. I laughed. No, that was pure impulse. But I like the idea that I was inadvertently following a historical precedent. Essence of Beth, Amber murmured with unexpected sincerity. Preserving what matters. That night after they left, I called James and invited him to come over. As we sat on my back porch watching fireflies dance in the garden, I recounted the visit. So the prodigal daughter-in-law returns, bearing gardenia and contrition, he summarized. Do you think the change is genuine? I considered the question carefully. Yes, I do. People can surprise you sometimes, especially when confronted with their own behavior in ways they can't ignore. Like finding an eviction notice scented with the very perfume they mocked, he suggested with a twinkle in his eye. Exactly like that. He took my hand, running his thumb over the silver key that still hung around my neck. What do you think about spending next weekend at Tybee? The light on the ocean is extraordinary. I'd like that, I said, leaning against his shoulder. Later, that night, after James had gone home, I found myself drawn to my vanity. The crystal bottle of Chanel No. 5 caught the lamplight, and beside it stood the travel size Amber had sent. Two variations of the same essence that now carried layers of meaning beyond their fragrance. I opened my journal and began to write, reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me here. What had begun as a small, defiant gesture, scenting an eviction notice with the perfume my daughter-in-law had mocked, had rippled outward, creating unexpected changes in all our lives. Tyler and Amber were building a healthier relationship in Seattle. The townhouse Robert loved had found a new purpose as a museum that would educate and inspire. And I had discovered that at 63, life could still offer surprising new chapters filled with passion, purpose, and possibility. I dabbed a drop of perfume on my wrist, breathing in the familiar scent that had become, improbably, a symbol of renewal. Tomorrow would bring a meeting about the museum's opening gala, dinner with James, and perhaps a call with Tyler to continue rebuilding our connection. The future stretched before me, rich with promise. Sometimes the most powerful acts of reclamation begin with the smallest assertions of self-worth. In my case, it had been a perfume-scented piece of paper, a fragrant declaration that I mattered, that my history deserved respect, that I would no longer accept being diminished or erased. The old lady and her perfume had found their power, and it smelled remarkably like freedom. The Savannah Residential Architecture Museum's grand opening was scheduled for the first Saturday in November. As the date approached, my days became a whirlwind of preparations, finalizing exhibits, training volunteer docents, and coordinating with local media. The Historical Society Board had unanimously voted to name me the museum's first director, a position I'd initially hesitated to accept. I'm not sure I have the right qualifications, I told James when he first suggested it. You have something better, he replied. Passion and first-hand knowledge. Besides, it's just 15 hours a week. You'll still have plenty of time for everything else in your life. Everything else had come to include regular weekends at James's Tybee Island home, volunteer work at the library's genealogy department, and a gradually warming long-distance relationship with Tyler. He called weekly now, our conversations growing, increasingly comfortable as old hurts gave way to new understanding. 3 days before the museum opening, I received an unexpected call from Seattle. Mom? Tyler's voice sounded strange, tight with emotion. I need your advice about something important. Of course, sweetheart. What's going on? A deep breath. Amber's pregnant. We just found out yesterday. The news caught me completely off guard. In all our recent conversations, they hadn't mentioned trying for a baby. That's wonderful news, I said carefully, noting his uncertain tone. How are you feeling about it? Terrified, he admitted. Excited, but mostly terrified. After how things went with you and Amber, I'm scared about repeating patterns. What if I can't protect my child well, from the worst parts of us? His vulnerability touched me deeply. Tyler, the fact that you're asking these questions already puts you ahead of the game. Being aware of patterns is the first step to changing them. That's what our therapist says too. He paused. Amber wants to ask you something if you have a minute. Before I could respond, Amber's voice came on the line. Beth, I hope it's okay that Tyler told you. Of course it is. Congratulations, Amber. Thank you. She sounded uncharacteristically tentative. I wanted to ask, would you consider coming out to Seattle after the baby is born, to stay with us for a week or two? I don't have a great relationship with my own mother, and I could really use someone who's been through this before. The request stunned me into momentary silence. This was the last thing I would have expected from Amber, an acknowledgement of my experience and a request for help that revealed genuine vulnerability. I'd be honored, I said finally, meaning it. Just let me know when, and I'll be there. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you know. After we hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, processing this new development. I was going to be a grandmother. The thought filled me with a complex mixture of emotions: joy, nostalgia, apprehension about navigating this new role with Amber, but mostly wonder at how life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. That evening, I shared the news with James over dinner at his craftsman bungalow in the historic district. Grandmother, he mused, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. How do you feel about that? Like I need to learn to knit, I joked, then grew serious. Honestly, I'm still processing it. It's strange to think of Amber as a mother. People often rise to the occasion when faced with parenthood, James observed. And she's already shown capacity for growth. True, I acknowledged. She's certainly not the same person who complained about my old lady perfume last year. James chuckled. Ah, the perfume that launched 1,000 changes. As we cleared the dinner dishes together, a comfortable domestic routine we'd established. Over months of sharing meals, James cleared his throat nervously. This grandmother's news does provide a convenient segue into something I've been wanting to discuss, he said, drying a wine glass with careful attention. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. I've been thinking that it might make sense for us to consider a more permanent arrangement. He set the glass down and turned to face me directly. What would you think about combining our households? The question wasn't entirely unexpected. We'd been spending most of our time together anyway, shuttling between his bungalow and my colonial, but it still gave me pause. Where would we live? I asked practically. That's open for discussion, he replied. My place has a better kitchen, but yours has that wonderful garden. Or we could look for something new together. The point is, I want to wake up with you every morning, not just when one of us decides to stay over. I considered it carefully. My house held decades of memories with Robert, but I'd gradually come to realize that those memories would travel with me wherever I went. They weren't contained in the walls or floors, but in my heart. Let's do it, I decided. But let's wait until after the museum opening and the holidays. That gives us time to figure out the details. His face broke into a radiant smile. I was prepared for a much longer negotiation. You continue to surprise me, Beth Harrison. Good, I replied, kissing him lightly. I'd hate to become predictable at my age. The days leading up to the museum opening passed in a blur of activity. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the townhouse's transformation, including a photograph of me standing on the front steps. The caption identified me as Elizabeth Harrison, director of the Savannah Residential Architecture Museum and historic preservation advocate, a description that would have astonished my younger self. The morning of the opening dawned clear and cool. Perfect weather for the outdoor reception we'd planned in the townhouse's courtyard garden. James arrived early to help set up, looking distinguished in a navy blazer and tie. Nervous? he asked, finding me in Robert's study, now transformed into an exhibit on traditional woodworking techniques. A little, I admitted. I keep worrying. We've forgotten something crucial. Everything is perfect, he assured me. The exhibits are engaging, the building looks magnificent, and the director is absolutely stunning. I smiled, smoothing the skirt of my emerald green dress, a new purchase for the occasion. Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Patterson. I'm counting on it, Ms. Harrison. The opening exceeded all our expectations. By noon, the townhouse was filled with visitors, local history enthusiasts, tourists, architectural students, and supporters of the Historical Society. Mayor Collins made an appearance, praising the museum as a testament to Savannah's commitment to preserving our architectural heritage. As I led guided tours through the rooms, sharing stories of Robert's restoration work and the historical significance of various features, I felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just about honoring the past, but building a bridge to the future, ensuring that the craftsmanship and design principles of previous generations wouldn't be lost. During a brief lull, I stepped into the kitchen, now an exhibit on historical foodways, and found myself alone for the first time that day. I leaned against the cherry cabinets, remembering how Robert and I had carefully restored them decades ago, and how Amber had later painted them stark white in her quest for modernization. Full circle, I murmured to myself. The best kind of journey, a familiar voice responded. I turned to find Margaret standing in the doorway, elegant in a pale blue suit. I've been trying to catch you alone all morning, she said, embracing me warmly. The museum is magnificent, Beth. Robert would have been so proud. Thank you, I said, blinking back sudden tears. That means a lot. She pulled back, studying my face with her lawyer's perspective gaze. You're happy, aren't you? Not just today, but generally. I considered the question seriously. Yes, I am, in ways I didn't expect to be again. James mentioned you two are thinking of moving in together. We are, after the holidays. Margaret grinned. Best matchmaking I've ever done. And to think it all started with a perfume-scented eviction notice, I laughed. Life takes the strangest turns. Speaking of turns, she said, her expression growing mischievous. Have you seen who just arrived? Before I could ask who she meant, she beckoned me to follow her to the front parlor. There, examining an exhibit on period wallpapers, stood Catherine and David Collins, Amber's parents. I approached them cautiously, unsure of my welcome. Our only previous meeting had been at Tyler and Amber's wedding, where they'd made it clear they considered me barely worth their notice. Mr. and Mrs. Collins? What a surprise to see you here. Catherine turned, her expression remarkably similar to Amber's when we'd first met, polished but reserved. Mrs. Harrison, Amber told us about your museum opening. Since we were in Charleston, for a conference, we thought we'd make the drive to see it. That's very kind of you, I said, genuinely surprised. David Collins, a tall man with Amber's dark hair and direct gaze, gestured around the room. You've done impressive work here. The historical accuracy combined with modern educational techniques is quite effective. Thank you, I replied, trying to reconcile these cordial individuals with the dismissive couple I remembered. Catherine hesitated, then asked, Is there somewhere we might speak privately? Curious and slightly wary, I led them to the small office at the back of the townhouse, the only room not open to the public for the event. Once the door closed behind us, Catherine's polished facade cracked slightly. Amber told us everything, she said without preamble. About how she treated you, about the eviction notice, and about how you've somehow managed to forgive her despite it all. I wasn't sure how to respond to this direct approach. Family relationships are complicated. Indeed, David agreed, looking uncomfortable. We owe you an apology as well. Our behavior at the wedding was inexcusable. We were elitist and rude. And now our daughter is expecting a child, Catherine continued, and speaking of you with more respect than she's shown us in years. It's been illuminating. The irony wasn't lost on me. Parenthood has a way of shifting perspectives. I offered neutrally. Yes, Catherine agreed softly. We're learning that rather late. The conversation that followed was awkward, but honest. They spoke of their struggling relationship with Amber, how their emphasis on achievement and status had created distance, and how they were trying, somewhat clumsily, to bridge that gap before their grandchild arrived. She says you're coming to Seattle after the birth, David mentioned. Perhaps we could meet for dinner while you're there? Start building something better for the next generation? The olive branch was unexpected, but welcome. I'd like that, I said sincerely. When we rejoined the reception, James caught my eye from across the room, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I gave him a small nod and smile, letting him know everything was fine. The remainder of the opening passed in a whirlwind of tours, conversations, and congratulations. By late afternoon, when the last visitors departed, I was exhausted but exhilarated. The museum committee had counted over 300 attendees, far more than we'd anticipated for our first day. I think we can call this an unqualified success, James declared as we collapsed onto a bench in the courtyard garden. The catering staff was packing up around us, and Historical Society volunteers were tidying the interior for tomorrow's official first day of operation. It feels surreal, I admitted. A year ago, I was serving Tyler and Amber that awkward dinner where she complained about my perfume. Now I'm the director of a museum, about to become a grandmother, and considering which house to share with me. What exactly are you, anyway? Boyfriend seems rather juvenile at our age. James pretended to consider the question seriously. Partner? Significant other? Main squeeze? I laughed. That last one definitely is not. How about the man who loves you more than he ever thought possible? He suggested, his tone shifting from playful to tender. That works, I said softly, leaning against his shoulder. As twilight settled over the courtyard, casting long shadows, across the brick pavers Robert had laid by hand decades ago, I felt a profound sense of completion. The townhouse had found its purpose, becoming a vessel for sharing the history and craftsmanship Robert had so valued. My relationship with Tyler was healing, and I had found a partner who understood that loving again didn't diminish what came before but added new chapters to an ongoing story. That night, after James drove me home, I found myself drawn to my dressing table. The crystal bottle of Chanel No. 5 caught the lamplight alongside the travel size Amber had sent, and a new addition, a vintage bottle from the 1950s that James had found at an antique shop in Charleston. 3 iterations of the same essence, each representing a different chapter in my life. I opened my journal and began to write, reflecting on the day's events and the strange, winding path that had led me here. What had begun as a moment of righteous petulance, scenting an eviction notice with the very perfume my daughter-in-law had mocked, had set in motion a cascade of changes I could never have predicted. Tyler and Amber were building a new life in Seattle, expecting a child and working to become better partners and soon, parents. The Collins family was tentatively reaching across generational divides, trying to break cycles of emotional distance. The townhouse Robert loved had been restored and transformed into a living museum that would educate and inspire for generations. And I had discovered that at 63, life was not finishing but beginning a new phase, rich with possibility, purpose, and love. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. Saw the newspaper article about the museum opening online. So, proud of you, Mom. The townhouse looks amazing. Attached was a photo of an ultrasound image. My future grandchild. A tiny collection of possibilities curled in the darkness, waiting to emerge. I texted back, "Thank you. Can't wait to meet this little one. All my love to both of you." Setting. Down my phone, I returned to my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the same person who had dabbed on Chanel No. 5 before that fateful dinner a year ago. She was stronger, more confident, less willing to shrink herself to accommodate others' expectations. The perfume that had once been mocked as an old lady scent had become a symbol of resilience, of boundaries lovingly maintained, of self-respect, reclaimed. Each time I wore it now, I carried that knowledge with me. A secret strength infused in every molecule. I dabbed a drop behind each ear, breathing in the familiar notes that had accompanied so many moments of my life. My mother's. Embrace my wedding day, quiet evenings with Robert, and now, the beginning of this unexpected new chapter with James. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, finalizing the museum's educational programs, beginning the process of combining households with James, planning my trip to Seattle for the baby's birth. The future stretched before me, rich with promise and complexity. But tonight, in the quiet of my bedroom, I savored the simple victory of having found my voice again. Remembering that respect wasn't something to beg for but to require. Of recognizing that even in the winter of life, new growth remains possible if we're brave enough to nurture it. The scent of Chanel No. 5 lingered in the air around me, no longer a relic of the past or a target for mockery, but a thread connecting. Who I had been with, who I was becoming. A fragrant reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of self-assertion can catalyst the most profound transformations. Sometimes, life's greatest turning points arrive disguised as minor indignities. A thoughtless comment about an old lady's perfume, a scented eviction notice delivered in a moment of justified spite. These seemingly small moments can reshape destinies when we refuse to remain diminished. As I closed my journal and prepared for bed, I smiled at the thought of sharing this wisdom with my grandchild someday. The inheritance I would pass down wasn't just family heirlooms or financial security, but the quiet conviction that it's never too late to stand your ground, to reclaim your dignity, to scent the paper of your life with the essence of your own choosing. After all, the most powerful legacy we leave isn't what we build or what we own, but how we choose to live. With grace, with courage, and with the abiding certainty that we deserve to take up space in the world exactly as we are. Old Lady Perfume, and all. 6 months after the museum's successful opening, spring had returned to Savannah. Azaleas bloomed in riotous color throughout the city, and tourists filled the historic squares, cameras ready to capture the city's legendary beauty. James and I had settled on keeping his craftsman bungalow as our primary residence. The process of combining two households after decades of independent living hadn't been without challenges, but the rewards far outweighed the occasional friction over closet space or kitchen organization. I never thought I'd have to defend my coffee mug collection at this stage of life, James had joked one evening as we negotiated which kitchen items would stay and which would go. And I never thought I'd have to explain why a man needs 17 nearly identical blue button-down shirts, I countered, making him laugh. We'd found our rhythm gradually, learning when to compromise and when to establish boundaries. My garden had been the one non-negotiable. I couldn't bear to leave the roses and gardenias Robert and I had planted together. James, understanding this, had suggested transplanting my favorite specimens to his larger backyard, creating a new garden that honored the past while embracing our shared future. The museum had flourished beyond our most optimistic projections. School groups regularly toured the exhibits, local universities used it for architectural history classes, and tourists consistently rated it among Savannah's hidden gems on travel websites. I'd settled into my role as director, finding unexpected fulfillment in sharing my passion for historical preservation with others. My house had sold quickly to a young family with 2 small children, a physician and her husband who worked remotely for a technology company. They'd fallen in love with the garden and promised to maintain the character of the home, a commitment that had eased the bittersweet transition of saying goodbye to the place where I'd spent most of my adult life. For my relationship with Tyler and Amber, the pregnancy had accelerated their personal growth in ways that continued to surprise me. Tyler called weekly with updates, his voice increasingly animated as they prepared for parenthood. Amber had joined a prenatal yoga class and found an unexpected community of support among the other expectant mothers. "She's different," Tyler had remarked during one of our calls. "More reflective, less concerned with appearances. The other day she actually admitted she was wrong about something. I nearly fell off my chair." I'd laughed, but privately I understood the profound changes that impending parenthood could trigger. Nothing clarifies priorities quite like the prospect of being responsible for a new life. In late April, the call we'd been anticipating finally came. Tyler's voice was breathless with excitement and exhaustion when I answered. "Mom, it's a girl. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Both she and Amber are doing great." Joy surged through me. "Oh, Tyler, congratulations. When was she born?" "About 4 hours ago. It was a long labor, but Amber was amazing." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "We've named her Eleanor Rose. Eleanor after Amber's grandmother and Rose after Dad's mother." The thoughtful gesture brought tears to my eyes. Robert's mother Rose had passed away before Tyler was born, but I'd often shared stories about her. Kindness and quiet strength. "It's a beautiful name," I managed. "When would you like me to come?" We settled on my arrival the following week, giving them time to establish a routine and return home from the hospital. James immediately insisted on driving me to the airport, despite my protests that I could easily take a taxi. "You're going to meet your first grandchild," he said firmly. "That deserves a proper send-off." The night before my departure, I stood in our bedroom carefully packing my suitcase. Selecting the right gifts for a newborn had been a delightful challenge. I'd settled on a handcrafted quilt from a local artisan, a silver rattle from an antique store downtown, and several classic children's books that had been Tyler's favorites. "Taking your signature scent?" James asked, nodding toward my dressing table where the crystal bottle of Chanel No. 5 stood. I smiled, touching the bottle lightly. "Of course. It's part of my identity now, isn't it? Besides, I think Amber might actually be disappointed if I showed up without it." "From mockery to appreciation," he mused. "That's quite a journey. For both of us," I agreed. The flight to Seattle the next day was smooth, though the 5 hours in the air gave me plenty of time to contemplate the strange twists of fate that had brought me to this moment. If Amber had never insulted my perfume, if I had never scented that eviction notice in a moment of justified petulance, would any of us be where we were now? Tyler met me at the airport, looking simultaneously exhausted and elated, the universal expression of new parenthood. We embraced warmly before he took my suitcase. "Fair warning," he said as we walked to the parking garage. "Our apartment looks like a baby supply store exploded in it. Amber's parents sent enough equipment for triplets." "Speaking of Catherine and David," I ventured carefully, "how are things going with them?" Tyler sighed. "Better. Not perfect, but better. They're trying, which is something. They're coming for dinner tomorrow night, actually. Amber thought it would be good for all of us to be together with Eleanor." I nodded, appreciating the olive branch this represented. "I'm looking forward to it." When we arrived at their apartment, a spacious 2-bedroom in a modern building with views of Lake Union, Amber was sitting in a rocking chair by the window, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. She looked up as we entered, her face softening into a genuine smile that contained none of the calculation I'd once associated with her. "Beth," she said warmly, "thank you for coming all this way." I approached slowly, my attention entirely captured by the small face peeking out from the blanket. Eleanor Rose had Tyler's chin and Amber's dark hair, a perfect blend of both parents. "May I?" I asked softly. Amber carefully transferred the sleeping infant into my arms. The weight of her, so slight yet so significant, brought a rush of memories from when Tyler had been this small. But there was something profoundly different about holding a grandchild, a sense of continuity, of life extending beyond my own timeline in tangible form. "She's absolutely perfect," I whispered, gently touching one tiny fist that had escaped the blanket. "She has your eyes," Amber said unexpectedly. "Tyler showed me baby pictures of himself, and she has that same shape." The observation touched me deeply. "Robert's mother had those eyes too," I told her. "It's fitting that they've come back with Eleanor Rose." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of midnight feedings, lullabies, and the 1,000 small rituals of newborn care. I took the night shift every third night, insisting that both Tyler and Amber needed rest to recover and function. During those quiet hours, rocking Eleanor while the city lights glimmered outside, I shared stories with her about her grandfather Robert, about the townhouse that was now a museum, about the perfume that had unexpectedly changed all our lives. The dinner, with Catherine and David Collins, proved less tense than I'd anticipated. They arrived bearing yet more gifts and a palpable desire to make amends. Catherine, holding Eleanor for the first time, showed a softness I wouldn't have believed possible based on our previous interactions. "She's extraordinary," she murmured, stroking the baby's cheek. "Thank you for letting us be here." The comment was directed at Amber, but her gaze included me in the acknowledgement. Later, as David and Tyler tackled dinner preparations, Catherine joined me on the balcony, where I'd stepped out for a moment of quiet. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "At Tyler and Amber's wedding, we were dismissive and rude. We acted as if our success somehow made us superior." "That was a long time ago," I replied, not unkindly. She shook her head. "Not that long. And patterns don't change unless we acknowledge them. Amber told us about the perfume incident, you know, and about how you responded." I raised an eyebrow, curious about Amber's version of events. "She said it was the first time anyone had ever stood up to her with such elegance." Catherine smiled slightly. "It made quite an impression. Started her thinking about the kind of person she wanted to be." "We've all grown since then," I offered, unwilling to take credit for Amber's personal evolution. "Yes," she agreed thoughtfully. "But sometimes we need a catalyst." She glanced through the glass doors to where Amber sat, nursing Eleanor. "I'm trying to be a better mother to her now. It's late, but perhaps not too late." "It's never too late," I said with conviction, thinking of my own unexpected new chapter with James. "Every relationship can be reimagined if both parties are willing." When my 2 weeks in Seattle drew to a close, I was surprised by my reluctance to leave. I'd grown accustomed to Eleanor's weight in my arms, to the rhythm of the household, to the strange new dynamic with Amber that had evolved from wary respect to something approaching friendship. The morning of my departure, Amber handed me a small, elegantly wrapped package. "A thank you," she explained, "for everything." Inside was a custom-made perfume bottle, crystal like my beloved Chanel No. 5, but with Eleanor Rose etched delicately into the glass. The bottle contained a familiar scent, my signature perfume, but with subtle notes of gardenia added, creating something both recognizable and new. "I worked with a local perfumer," Amber explained. "The base is Chanel No. 5, but we added gardenias because you mentioned they were your favorite flower." I thought, maybe it could be a new tradition, something to connect generations. The thoughtfulness of the gift left me momentarily speechless. "This way," she continued, suddenly shy, "Eleanor will always recognize your scent, even when you're back in Savannah. And when she's older, maybe it could be something special you share." I embraced her. This woman who had once mocked my old lady perfume and now offered it back to me, transformed into a symbol of connection and continuity. "Thank you," I said simply. "This means more than you know." On the flight home, I held the custom perfume bottle carefully in my lap, watching the clouds pass beneath the plane. Life's strangest journeys often begin with moments of conflict or pain. A thoughtless comment, a relationship fractured, a scented eviction notice delivered in righteous anger. But the true miracle lies in what grows from these broken places. Understanding, forgiveness, new versions of ourselves we never imagined possible. James was waiting at the Savannah airport, a bouquet of gardenias in hand. As we drove home through the twilight, I shared stories of Eleanor, of midnight lullabies, of the unexpected gift from Amber. "So the perfume saga continues," he observed with a smile. "From insult to eviction notice to family tradition. Quite a transformation. Life rarely moves in straight lines," I replied, watching the familiar landmarks of Savannah pass outside the window. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys are the ones that circle back, showing us the same landscape from an entirely new perspective. That night before sleep claimed me, I dabbed a drop of the new perfume, Chanel No. 5 with notes of gardenia behind each ear. The scent carried memories of 4 generations. My mother, who had first given me the perfume, myself, who had made it a signature, Amber, who had once mocked and now honored it, and tiny Eleanor Rose, who would grow up associating it with her grandmother. Some legacies are written in wills or carved in stone. Others linger in the air, invisible but powerful, connecting past to future through the most ephemeral of threads. A fragrance that reminds us who we were, who we are, and who we might yet become. 2 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Eleanor Rose had grown from a tiny newborn into a curious, spirited toddler with Tyler's infectious laugh and Amber's determination. Through weekly video calls and quarterly visits, I'd watched her transformation with a grandmother's pride and wonder. The museum had become an established part of Savannah's cultural landscape, even receiving a preservation award from the state Historical Society. I'd gradually scaled back my hours as director, training a passionate young architectural historian named Melissa to take over the day-to-day operations while I remained involved as a consultant and occasional tour guide. James and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm in our shared life. After 40 years of marriage to Robert and 5 years alone, I'd feared I might struggle with another person's constant presence. But James had an intuitive understanding of when to engage and when to grant space. His morning routine of coffee on the porch with the newspaper gave me quiet time for journaling, while our evening ritual of discussing the day over dinner provided connection without obligation. "We're getting rather good at this partnership business," he remarked one evening as we worked side by side in the garden, tending to the transplanted roses from my former home. "Practice makes perfect," I replied, smiling as he reached over to brush soil from my cheek. In Seattle, Tyler and Amber had continued their own evolution. Amber had launched a successful interior design business focusing on historically sensitive renovations, an ironic twist given her previous modernization of the townhouse. Tyler had been promoted to senior environmental consultant at his firm, managing projects that aligned with his values while providing well for his growing family. Growing, because Amber was now 5 months pregnant with their second child, a boy, according to the ultrasound. They planned to name him Robert James, honoring both my late husband and my current partner, a gesture that had moved both James and me to tears when they announced it. The annual Harrison Collins family gathering had become a tradition, alternating between Savannah and Seattle. This year was Savannah's turn, with Tyler, Amber, and Eleanor arriving for a week-long stay, followed by a weekend with Catherine and David joining us. The prospect of having everyone together filled me with anticipation and a touch of anxiety. Family dynamics were always complex, regardless of how much healing had occurred. They arrived on a warm May afternoon, Eleanor racing up the front walk, ahead of her parents, her dark curls bouncing with each step. "Nana!" she called, launching herself into my arms with complete confidence that I would catch her. At 2.5, she was a whirlwind of energy and affection. "Look at you," I marveled, setting her down to twirl in her yellow sundress. "You've grown so much since Christmas. I'm a big girl now," she informed me solemnly. "And I'm going to be a big sister. The biggest news in her world," Tyler explained, embracing me warmly before retrieving their luggage from the rental car. Amber followed more slowly, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly. The changes in her went beyond the physical. There was a grounded quality to her now, a quiet confidence that had replaced her former brittle polish. "Beth," she said, hugging me carefully, "the garden looks amazing. Those must be the transplanted roses you told me about?" "James has worked wonders with them," I confirmed, noting how she'd remembered this detail from our conversations. "He's inside preparing lunch." As we settled into the rhythms of our visit, I marveled at how naturally we all interacted now. Eleanor adored James, following him around the garden and demanding stories about the olden days. Tyler and Amber moved through our home with the ease of people who felt truly welcome. The tensions and resentments that had once defined our relationship had transformed into something I wouldn't have dared hope for during those difficult early years. On their third evening, while James took Eleanor for ice cream, Amber asked if we could talk privately. We settled in the garden as twilight approached, the scent of gardenias heavy in the warm air. "I've been wanting to thank you," she began, "for something I'm not sure I've ever properly acknowledged." "What's that?" I asked, curious about her unusually reflective mood. "For standing up to me," she said simply. "For scenting that eviction notice with your perfume and refusing to let me steamroll you. It changed everything for me, though I couldn't see it at the time." I smiled at the memory, now distant enough to be almost fond. That wasn't my finest moment. Petty revenge isn't usually my style. "But it wasn't just petty revenge," she insisted. "It was a boundary. You were essentially saying, 'This is who I am, and I won't be diminished.'" I'd never encountered that before. Everyone else in my life either fought back aggressively or simply gave in. Her insight surprised me. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. "The perfume has become something of a symbol for me," Amber continued, gazing out at the garden. "Whenever I catch a whiff of Chanel No. 5, it reminds me to check myself, to ask if I'm respecting others' boundaries, if I'm making space for perspectives different from my own." The conversation shifted to her pregnancy, her hopes for how Eleanor and the new baby would relate to each other, her evolving relationship with her parents. As we talked, I realized that Amber had developed a capacity for self-reflection that would have seemed impossible during our early encounters. "Eleanor asked me something interesting yesterday," she mentioned as our conversation wound down. "She wanted to know why Grandpa Robert isn't in any of our new family pictures, but Grandpa James is." "What did you tell her?" I asked gently. "That Grandpa Robert lives in our hearts and memories now, and that's a special kind of magic, being loved by people who never got to meet you in person." Amber hesitated. I hope that was okay. I wanted to honor him without confusing her. Tears welled unexpectedly. "That was perfect, Amber. Thank you." The weekend arrival of Catherine and David added another layer to our gathering. They came bearing gifts for Eleanor and thoughtful offerings for the rest of us, a rare architectural book for James, artisanal tea for me, and vintage vinyl records for Tyler's growing collection. Over Saturday dinner in our backyard, with fairy lights twinkling in the trees, and Eleanor finally asleep after exhausting everyone with her energy, Catherine raised her glass in a toast. "Two unlikely families," she said, her gaze moving around the table, "and to the perfume that brought us together." We all laughed, the shared reference no longer carrying any sting. After dinner, as the men cleared dishes and prepared coffee, Catherine drew me aside. "I have something for you," she said, retrieving a small package from her purse. "It's not exactly a peace offering, since we've already made our peace, but perhaps a celebration of that peace." Inside the package was a first edition book on the history of Chanel No. 5. published in the 1950s, and filled with beautiful illustrations and historical photographs. I found it in a rare bookshop in Paris last month, she explained. Given the Perfume's significance in our family story, it seemed fitting. The thoughtfulness of the gift moved me deeply. This is wonderful, Catherine. Thank you. You know, she said reflectively, I've been thinking about how scent connects to memory, how a single fragrance can come to embody a person, a relationship, a turning point in life. It's powerful, I agreed. Eleanor now associates my visits with Chanel No. 5. James says she always sniffs the air when she knows I'm coming. Catherine smiled. Creating olfactory memories for the next generation. There's something profound about that. On our visitor's final evening, we gathered for a family photograph in the garden, all 3 generations together among the roses and gardenias. Eleanor insisted on sitting on my lap, while Tyler stood behind Amber, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. James and Catherine's husband David bookended the group, with Catherine beside me. As the camera timer counted down, Eleanor suddenly turned and pressed her nose against my neck, inhaling deeply. "Nana Perfume," she declared happily, causing everyone to laugh just as the shutter clicked. Later, when I saw the resulting photograph, I was struck by the genuine joy captured in that spontaneous moment, so different from the stiff, formal wedding photos where I'd felt like an unwelcome outsider in my son's new life. That night, after our guests had returned to their hotel and quiet settled over the house, James found me in our bedroom, looking at the photograph on my phone. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, sitting beside me on the edge of the bed. "I was just thinking." "About unlikely catalysts," I replied. "How the smallest moments can change everything that follows." He nodded, understanding immediately. "The butterfly effect of a perfume-scented eviction notice." "Exactly." I set the phone aside and reached for his hand. If Amber had never complained about my old lady perfume, if I had never retaliated with that scented document, none of this might exist. The museum, our relationship, the healing with Tyler, Amber's transformation, Eleanor's Nana Perfume, the Sao. Universe works in mysterious ways, James observed, squeezing my hand. Sometimes the worst moments contain the seeds of the best ones. As we prepared for bed, I performed my nightly ritual, a dab of perfume behind each ear, even though the day was ending rather than beginning. The familiar scent, now blended with gardenias in the custom formulation Amber had given me, filled the air with memories and possibilities. From an insult to a petty revenge, to a family tradition, to a symbol of transformation, the journey of this fragrance paralleled our own evolution from strangers to adversaries to family. Some lessons arrive in grand, dramatic moments that shake the foundations of our lives. Others come quietly, wrapped in unexpected packages, or scented with a perfume once mockingly called Old Lady, now passed down as a cherished legacy connecting generations. In the end, perhaps that's the most powerful revenge of all. Not retribution, but transformation, turning wounds into wisdom, conflicts into connection, and everyday moments into the bridges that span the distance between who we were and who we might become. As I drifted toward sleep, Eleanor's sweet declaration echoed in my mind. Nana Perfume. 2 simple words that contained a world of healing, growth and love, the essence of a journey none of us could have foreseen, bottled in memory like the precious fragrance that started it all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.